Hey, welcome back to Broken Knights Games. My name is Sam, and today we're going to be talking about creating split-screen co-op using the new input system. And I'll have links to my projects in the description below, but we'll be using a project starting point that I had in a previous video for creating a top-down character mover as well as creating a mini-map. So if you haven't seen those videos, I encourage you to check those out. But anyways, let's get started and do some split screen. Okay, so if you've seen my previous videos, this will look familiar. This is the project where I first created a top-down movement script, and then we created a little mini map. So if you want to check those videos out, I'll have a link to the description. But we're gonna use this project as a starting point. So let me open up in Visual Studio. And I'll go to Team Explorer. So we have two branches, master and minimap. So master branch is going to have just the top-down mover script example, and then we have the minimap, which I did in my previous video. So I'm going to create a branch here, new local branch from, and we're just going to call this split screen start. So if you want to follow along, go ahead and clone this repository and switch to this branch, and I will push this. I'll push that branch, and if we go to branches, we have our split screen start branch has been pushed. So now you can clone it and switch to this branch and start here to follow if you want to follow along with what I'm doing. So I will go from here. So I'm actually going to create another branch from the minimap, and we'll call this split screen solution, and that's what I'm going to be doing right here in the video. But if you're following along the video, just follow from split screen start, and you should have the same end result as split screen solution. And if you don't, you can always switch to this branch and see how I did it. So hopefully that all made sense and you're kind of somewhat familiar with Git. If not, hey, let me know in the comments and I can do another video on Git and some basic Git workflows just to help you feel a bit more comfortable with that. But enough of that. So alright, split screen solution. So we have our top-down movement scene with the minimap and map icons. I'm going to duplicate this, and we're going to call this split screen demo, and we're going to open up this scene. And we don't need the minimap, we don't need the icons, we're just gonna delete that. Event system, we don't need this either, that's not needed. Alright, so we just have our character prefab environment and directional lights. So if I get play, and okay, that looks good. And our character prefab with this minimap icons, we can also delete that since we don't have a minimap. So this method of split screen that I'm going to show you is actually going to use the new input system. So this project doesn't have it installed yet. So we're going to do that by opening the window, and we're going to go to Package Manager. And then in here, we're going to search for input system. 1.0 is the version I'm going to be using. So I'm going to install this. So if you haven't seen my other video where I show you how to set up the input system, you'll get a quick version of it here, kind of a recap. Alright, so when this is finished installing, it just says that we need to switch the project over to use a new input system instead of the legacy input system, and it's going to restart Unity. So I hit yes, and we'll wait for this to happen. Okay, so Unity opened up again. With the input system installed, so I'm going to close the package manager window. And then if we look at our character prefab, I have the top-down character mover, and then I have this input handler script. So if we take a look at this, all this does is read from the legacy input system and gets our input movement vector. So we can use this and hook it up to the new input system. So to do that, we're going to create a public method and make it void, and we'll call this set input vector. I'm just going to take a callback context, CTX, just call it, and we need to import a namespace, so I'm going to hit Control period to bring up the IntelliSense, and we're going to click on this using static Unity Engine input system input action. So it's going to automatically add our using statement at the top, and all we're going to do is set our input vector equals context read value, and then this is going to read it as a vector too. Alright, so we have a method to set our input vector. So now we need to set up our input system controls. And also, we don't want to be reading from the legacy input system, otherwise we'll get errors. So we're just going to delete this update method. It's not needed anymore. So if we go back to our project, we need to create a input actions asset to define all input actions, and a quick way we can do this is if I just add a component to our character prefab and I choose player input. This is the new input system input component. If I click this create actions button, it's going to create the input actions asset and give us some basic actions already defined to save some time. So I'll just call this player movement, or we'll call this player actions. Could be more than just movement. So if we look at our player actions, you can see we have a player and a UI action map, and we already have move, look, and fire already wired up with the gamepad or keyboard. So we don't really have to do anything else. And if we wanted to add more buttons, we could add those, but this is all we need for this demo, so I'm going to close this window just to show you that. So if we go back to our character prefab, and we need to assign the input actions asset, so I'm going to do that. So now this is using the input actions, and auto switch will leave on, and we'll save that. And then for the behavior, we can do a couple of things. We can do send messages, broadcast messages, invoke Unity events, or invoke C# events. I'm going to choose Unity events just for simplicity because it's a little bit easier to see what's going on. So for the player, all we need to do to get this working is to wire up the move action. So I'm going to hit plus here and select our character prefab as the object, and then under the function, we're going to choose the player input handler script and select our set input vector method. So this just wires up this action to this method, so we'll set our input vector as we get input values from the input system. All right, so I'm going to save this, and we should test this. We hit play. All right, and I'm using the keyboard and I'm moving around. Then we can also test this with a gamepad. I have the controller, so I'm moving the joystick and my character's moving around. So cool, the new input system is working as expected. Thanks for moving on my desk here. All right, so I'm gonna hit play to stop, and all right, so we have our input system. So now we need to set up local multiplayer and split screen. So I'm going to create an empty game object, and we'll call this our multiplayer input manager. And we'll just reset the transform, and we'll add a component, and we'll add this player input manager. And this is a component in the new input system that helps you easily manage multiple input devices and multiple players. So we have the join behavior, join when a button is pressed, and player prefab. So we'll have to create a prefab that's going to spawn when the button is pressed, and we're also going to limit the number of players to 2. And then there's this split screen option. So we're going to be using this, and we will enable split screen. And then we have a couple options. Maintain aspect ratio. So basically, if I have in my game view, Right now I have it set to free aspect, but if I had it set to 16:9, for example, when a player would spawn in, the screen would split and maintain that 16:9 aspect ratio. So if I had 2 players, we'd just have the top 2 corners with a screen. But I'm gonna set it to, I'm going to leave that unchecked, so it'll just fill up the available space. So if we have free aspect ratio, for example, it's just gonna split down the center. We need to create a player prefab to spawn. So what I'm gonna do is create a empty game object, and we'll call this player camera group. Alright, so we have our object for a player with camera group, and I'm going to reset the transform. And then we want this to be set up with our main camera and character prefabs. So I'm going to, alright, so I'm going to drag player camera group into a child of character prefab, and then I'm going to reset the transform so it becomes centered on the player. And then I'm going to drag player camera group out. And you can see it's in the same world position, but now it has the new values. So that's a little trick. If you need to create a parent game object and center the children on it, based on how you have the children already aligned. So I'm going to select the main camera and the character prefab and drag them into the player camera group. So now we have this object and the camera and the players set up how we want it. So I'm going to save this, and I will create a prefab out of this by dragging this over. So that's our player camera group. And there's one thing we need to configure, so I'm going to open our prefab and just fix one thing. So on the character prefab, we have on our player input, you can add a reference to a camera, and we're going to need to do this for the split screen multiplayer. So I'm going to drag our main camera onto there. And maybe we should name this something other than main camera. Let's call this player camera. Alright, so we're going to save that, and I'm going to hit back here to go back to our scene. So we have our player camera group. I'm going to delete this prefab, and then we're going to go to our multiplayer input manager and select our player camera group prefab and assign it to player prefab. Alright, so I'm going to then hit play, and let's see what happens. Alright, so nothing's rendering right now, but I'm gonna hit a key. Okay, so my player joined and I move it around. Now let's try adding the gamepad. Oh, look at that. So now we have the screen is split down the center, and we have our 2 players, and I'm able to move around, one with the keyboard and one with the gamepad. So that's the quick way to get split screen running. And then just to show you, if we go to multiplayer input manager and we set this maintain aspect ratio, and if we set fixed number to 4 and I hit play, you can see I just occupy 1 quadrant because we set the fixed number to 4. And then also, if we went to game view and did like a 16:9 aspect ratio, for example, and then even if I set this to 2, oops, so I set this to 2, and then we save it and play. You can see that we only have 2 rectangles, and then the rest is black space, but you can see that each player's screen is that 16:9 aspect ratio. So that's kind of how you can control that. And if I scale this, you know, it's gonna maintain that. But I'm gonna turn off maintain aspect ratio so we fill up the whole screen. Alright, so this is a pretty quick video, but for some bonus points, if you want to have like a press A to join, how would we do that? So let's create a game object, and we'll call this player join view. And then let's add a camera to that. And then let's adjust the position of this camera. Bring it back, maybe bring it up, and kind of have a look at the map here. How's that look? Yeah, that looks good. And then go to UI and select Text Mesh Pro, and this window is going to pop up. It opened up off screen for me, so I'm going to import the Text Mesh Pro Essentials. I need that to use Text Mesh Pro. Alright, so now for here I'm going to just say press any key or button to join. And let's just center this. And see how this looks. Yeah, that looks fine. Alright, so now if we hit play, we're going to see it's going to have this camera view, and then if I hit the keyboard key, and oh no, we can't see our players. So this player join view is displaying, but if I disable it, you can see that our players are there and the camera split. So I'm going to go into here and fix this so that when the player joins, we're going to disable this press any key to join. So we're going to add a script here. Let's call this disable game object. And we'll open this up in Visual Studio. This is going to be a very simple script. We're going to add a serialized field reference to a game object. And we'll call this target. And then we're going to add a public method. Call it disable target. And we're going to set target set active false. Super small script, and we're going to add this to our multiplayer input manager. We're going to add the disable game object, and we're going to set the target to be our player join view. And then on the player input manager, we're going to change the notification behavior to be invoke Unity events as well. So we have different events. So like when a player joins, we're going to hit the plus key, and we're going to add a reference to our multiplayer input manager, and then we're going to select the disable game object script and find our disable target, and we're going to wire that up. So now when a player joins, we're just going to disable that object. So if we hit play to see what happens. Alright, so I'm going to hit the key. And the other player joins, and there we go. Now our split screen isn't covered up anymore. Okay, so we see we have some errors here. Let's fix that. So invalid operation exception. You were trying to read input from the Unity Engine input class. So if we double click on this, let's see where that is. Oh, it's this event system. So when I added the Canvas Text Mesh Pro, it created a UI input system. We don't need that. And then also, just a side note, if you're going to be using the new input system, you can see this message here. This is for the legacy input system. So if we click this replace with input system UI input module, it's just going to replace it with the new version of the UI input system, basically. So, but we don't even need that, so I'm going to delete it. What's our other error? We have 2 audio listeners in the scene. Okay, so we have our multiplayer join view. If we go to our camera, you can see they added an audio listener. Let's delete that. And also, our player prefabs have a camera, which also has an audio listener. And I don't think we want that either. So if we get our player camera group prefab and go to our player camera, let's also remove that audio listener. All right, so now if we hit play, all right, so we got our 2 characters move around and we have no errors, so it's always important. And then if you ever needed to have sound effects with this, you'd have to add a audio listener. That's just one to your scene. So yeah, there you go. That's a quick way to get split screen up and running using the new input system. Pretty easy, just need to set the camera on the character prefab, and then in the input manager we just need to enable split screen, and then you can customize it further with these settings. And I will be saving this and pushing it to this split screen solution branch on my GitHub, so you can download the whole repository and switch to this branch if you want to see the solution, or you can follow along, like I said, by starting with this split screen start branch, which is a branch from the minimap end state. So hopefully that'll make sense. I'm going to commit this, and I will push this up to GitHub when this video goes live so you can see the solution. So there you have it. That's split screen using the new input system. I hope you found this video helpful and informative, or at least entertaining maybe. Anyways, if you have any comments, let me know in the comment section down below. And if you like this, give me a thumbs up and let me know. Also, if you have any ideas for future videos or topics you'd like to see me cover, just let me know in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Bye.